All right, welcome everybody to today's Workshop for Good. I'm going to turn things over to our host, Alli Collier.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight, everyone. We're just so thankful to be able to support Friends of Fairfax County Animal Shelter through this event. They represent the nonprofit for the Fairfax County Animal Shelter. So they support all the pups and kitties that go through there and all the other various types of animals. I want to thank all the speakers that are on this call. They're also sponsors and will be making a charitable donation to the organization. So I'm just happy that we could mix a little bit of an educational event with supporting, a local community. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and just give you guys a general overview of what we're about to dive into. So to start out, these are our speakers on here. I have Rhoda Ron, she's with Caliber Home Loans. She is a great lender, someone you can really count on if you're looking into getting a mortgage loan to purchase a house. I've got Helen Cross, she's with New World Title. They are located in McLean and they are fantastic. They make the process super smooth. And she's gonna give us a little information on settlement for those that are curious. And then I've got Scott Beckman, and he is with BPG Inspections. He is going to tell you all about what to look for when you go in and do a home inspection, and I also highly recommend him. So with that being said, I'm going to dive into the agenda. So we already kind of touched over the welcome and introduction, but after that, I'm going to let Rhoda talk about financing. I'm going to give you a market update. We'll talk about the home buying process, the home selling process. We'll talk a little bit about COVID. And in the interim, Scott is going to cover the home inspection and Helen will cover settlement in particular. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Rhoda.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Rhoda with Caliber Home Loans, and I'm already messing up because there we go. I think, nope. Here we go. I think I'm sharing my screen properly. So anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about options for financing people's homes. One of the most important things to understand is that there are so many different mortgage programs out there. Some people feel that if they don't have 20% of a down payment that they can't buy a house, or if they have challenged credit that they can't buy a house. But there are so many different products that we can usually help people kind of step their way through it. And that's what I'm there for. It's not your job as a client to make those, to have to figure it out on your own. We're also going to talk about what makes up the monthly mortgage payment and talk a little bit about credit and the pre-approval. And there we go. Okay. As far as what we do as a lender, we are a nationwide lender, so we can offer mortgages, obviously in this area, and being such a large lender, we have almost all loan programs available to our buyers. And again, we can help people to select what's best for them. As far as what goes into that loan is different factors such as your credit score, how much of a down payment. Occupancy is also a big factor. If you're buying a house as your primary residence versus an investment property or a second home. And then property types only really come into play if it's a condominium, because those have a little bit more restrictions and overlays, but not something that should be fearful by any means. It's just a little bit more work kind of on our end, not on your end. With that said, as I was saying earlier, as far as down payment requirements, again, a lot of people do assume that they need 20% down. Just to touch on that a little bit, if you don't have 20% down with most loan programs, then you're required to pay monthly mortgage insurance. This is not homeowners insurance. This is basically ensuring that if you don't hold up your end, the mortgage company has an insurance company sort of backing up that debt. If you have very high credit scores, the mortgage insurance can be very, very inexpensive. And it's also another option for first-time home buyers or even second and third-time home buyers to go with a FHA loan, which I know before I got in the business, I always thought that sounded like a government loan. Well, it is a government loan, but it doesn't mean you have to work for the government. It's just backed by the government, and it gives more flexibility for higher debt to income, meaning that you can afford a little bit more house, even if you have a little bit heavier debt load. It has generally very low interest rates, which is great, and very low required down payment. So it is a very flexible loan for not just first-time home buyers, but anybody who's looking at putting down less and might be a little challenged on credit, or just need a little bit more stretching room with their debt to income. Another thing about a mortgage is your payments. So your monthly mortgage payment, just to go on to that, it's going to be the principal and interest, which is the basically paying back the loan itself. Then we also include into your mortgage payment the real estate taxes. So whatever the annual real estate taxes are for the house, we're going to divide that by 12 and collect that and pay it on your behalf throughout the year. And then also homeowners insurance, which, as I was saying, is different than monthly mortgage insurance. This is an option that you get to shop for. So you can go and look at different insurance companies and find the best coverage and the best price for you. And then once again, we're going to collect that 1/12 of that payment each month, then pay it when it comes due on your behalf. As I touched on earlier, if you have less than 20% down, then there's usually going to be monthly mortgage insurance. And that payment can be very flexible or very diverse, depending again on credit scores and loan program types. You know, sometimes we'll see something as low as $48 a month. Sometimes we'll see something as high as $250 a month, give or take on either end. But that just gives you an idea. It can be a dramatic difference depending on credit scores and loan program. And then one thing that you do pay separately, but we always count as part of your monthly debt to income, is if you have an HOA or a condo. So anytime you're in an HOA or condo, there's going to be fees related to that. And we want to make sure that that is something that you're prepared to pay and that doesn't catch you off guard. As far as the principal and interest, that's derived from the interest rate, the total balance of the loan, and also the loan term. Most people right now are taking fixed loans and fixed rate loans, and typically 30-year loans are the most popular because it allows you to stretch out those payments over time. And with interest rates so low, it's really a good option for most people. And then I kind of touched on this already as far as the taxes and insurance and mortgage insurance. And then going back to, this is where I come in to doing my part of the job. What I like to do is always work with my clients to get a big picture, not just how much you can afford, but how much you're comfortable paying. You might qualify to buy a $750,000 house because you have enough for a down payment and you have enough income to make that required monthly payment. But that might not fit your lifestyle. Just because you have the finances you might be planning to scale back, or you might be planning on building a family, or you might want to spend more money traveling, although none of us are going anywhere these days, it seems, but eventually we'll get to travel again, I hope. We don't just sort of plug you in and say, okay, go buy a $750,000 house. We also back that up by saying, what's your comfort level? How much do you want to put down? How much are you comfortable paying? And then making the adjustments to fit your lifestyle with those factors. And then I think this is a really good overview of what goes into your credit score. And of course, let me just do that real quick. Yeah, because I was not able to see the full graph. So the little chart shows you the different things that make up people's credit scores. And your credit score is probably one of the most important factors of getting a mortgage or any credit out there. And length of history is, of course, important. And payment history, in other words, no late payments, very, very important. But amounts owed is something that I think people don't realize. I think a lot of people assume that as long as they're making their payments on time, that there would be no issue with, if you have a $10,000 credit card, if you make your monthly payment every month on time, then you should have great credit. But if you run your credit card up to $10,000 and make your monthly payment each month, that maxed out credit limit can actually have a negative impact on your credit score. So it is important to keep your balances, especially on credit cards, below 40% of the maximum line of credit to help build that credit score. And then again, as part of my job to get you pre-approved, we look at your credit, your income, your assets. And again, not only to see what you can afford, but what you're comfortable with affording. And I always provide an estimate to my clients when we first get started. So you see exactly what you're going to be coming out of pocket, not just for your down payment, but also for anticipated closing costs. And then also seeing what that payment looks like. And well, how to pick a right lender? Well, that's easy. I'm right here. But it is important. I've been in business for more than 15 years. I'm accessible evenings, weekends, as well as 9 to 5. And I am local, and Caliber is a very big name in this area. And with such a competitive market, it is important to know that that lender letter is going to have some backing to it. People are going to trust that the seller and their agent are going to trust that that is going to go through because they've got a good lender that's always going to be accessible and available. And then I'm going to send it on back to you, Alli, for you to give us all the market update.
Perfect. So I'm going to be sharing. All right, so let's dive into the market update. So this is going to show trends that are specifically in Northern Virginia. I always say though, if you're in DC, it's going to be a similar trend. So a lot of the trends and statistics that I bring up while we go through this, it's going to be applicable. So you can see here, 2020 is the year of, it's just different than normal. You can see in 2017, 2018, and 2019 in this graph, this is a graph of new inventory that's come on the market. So a lot of people will say, well, when's the best time to buy? And it really is seasonal in terms of how many houses are on the market. So as you can see here, we're usually at our lowest inventory level in the winter. December and January, there's usually going to be the least amount of homes on the market. What we typically see is an uptick starting in February, and usually we reach a peak in May, and then it will dip back down a little bit in June and July, and then it picks back up after Labor Day weekend. So usually what we see is there's the most houses available to you in the spring and fall. Now, as you can see, year over year, there's been less and less houses that have gone on the market. This year in particular was totally strange in that we really didn't see a spring peak. And I don't have the stats on here through October, but it's actually stayed fairly level across the year. And so, we're still seeing a lot of houses coming on the market, even with Thanksgiving around the corner. So I can't tell you exactly what will go on the rest of the year. I anticipate that once the holidays hit, we'll see a little bit of a decline, but it's continued to go on strong. So you never know. But if you're thinking about buying next year, again, I don't know if it's going to normalize, but this is essentially what you can anticipate is what you're seeing in the graph for 2017, 2018, and 2019. That you'll have more houses on the market in the spring and fall. So when's the best time to buy? And the answer is it depends. So what you see on this graph is the yellow is active listings and the red is pending listings. So you can see that during July, August, and September, there's larger gaps between active listings and new pending listings. And that just means that there's more inventory than there is going under contract. So buyers actually have a little bit more negotiating power. You'll see in the spring and in the fall, it usually declines. And then in the winter, the buyer usually has more negotiating power as well. So when people ask me this, there's a couple ways it can go. If you want the most options, you could buy in the spring or the fall, but you're probably going to be competing the most. If you have more flexibility and can wait longer, it might be better to buy in the winter or in the middle of summer because you're going to have more negotiating power and more leverage. So let's dive a little bit into the home buying process. So should you rent or should you buy? Everybody thinks about this. What I usually tell people as a rule of thumb is if you're not going to be in the house for 3 to 4 years, it is probably best to continue to rent. And the reason why is when you go to buy, you're going to spend about 2.5% to 3% on closing costs. And when you go to sell, you're going to spend closer to 6 or 7%. And the reason why it's higher on the selling side is because you're going to pay both the selling commission and the buyer side commission. So your house needs to appreciate 10% in order to even break even. And statistically in this area, that usually takes 3 to 4 years, depending on the price point of the home. So that's the biggest thing, is you just need to determine how long you're going to be in the home to decide if it is probably going to be worth it to purchase a home. Keep in mind, you can write off mortgage interest and property taxes. I always say, speak to your CPA. They can give you more in-depth information about, whether you want to do an itemized or standard deduction, but that is a pro of buying a house. And we have a rent versus buy calculator on our website. It's through the New York Times. You can input more specific information in there to make a decision. Choosing an agent. So this is our team. I'm on the Wethman Group team, but there's, I'd say, 5 key factors in choosing a real estate agent. I think the first and most important is that you need to have a full-time agent. It is a huge investment. And so you don't want someone who dabbles in it part-time. You want someone who's really, in the market every day and knows what's going on. You want to talk to them about how long they've been doing it. Our team's been in the area for about 15 years. And you want to know what do they focus on? What price range do they usually do? Is there a specific location they usually focus on? I always recommend working with a team. There's great solo agents out there, but the nice thing about a team is if someone's sick or out of town, they have an entire group of people who can help them out. You'll want to discuss how the agent gets paid. Some agents require a minimum commission amount. So let's say they require 3% and the seller's only offering 2.5%, then you would have to come up with more money at closing. Our team does not have a minimum commission, so we're just paid the amount that's offered by the seller. And then the last thing is the agent will likely tell you to sign a buyer representation agreement. We're required to do this in order to submit an offer on your behalf. So the biggest thing is read through that. You need to make sure that there's no retainer fee, there's no cancellation fee, that type of thing, to make sure that and the agent should be willing to go through it with you paragraph by paragraph. I'd say if they aren't, it's a red flag. So I always recommend going through that document with your agent. Let's dive a little bit into the home buying process. So the first thing you're going to do is meet with your agent, and I'd say even before that, you need to talk to Rhoda or your loan officer, because you want to know how much you can afford. Once you've identified that, you want to meet with an agent. You're going to discuss the price, size and type of home and location that you can afford. And usually there's a little give and take there, because unless the budget fits exactly what you want in terms of the size of the home and the location, then you're probably going to have a little give on one of the two. Once you've identified that, you can start your search. Obviously, you can search online. There's tons and tons of resources. My one piece of advice is, if you're looking on Zillow, it's a portal and it's not directly tied to the multiple listing service, which is our database for houses. So it's just not always the most accurate. But if you look on websites like realtor.com or Redfin or anything that's tied directly to the MLS, it will be pretty accurate. You can go to open houses. Most agents will host these over the weekends. My recommendation is to do a private tour if you really like a house, because sometimes a listing will not make it to the weekend. So you go out, you look at homes, you find one you really like, you're going to put in an offer. In the offer, you're going to negotiate a few things. So price, terms, and contingencies. There's major contingencies we're going to talk about a little bit later on, but it's not always just based on price. You've got to think through, when's the closing date? How quickly can they turn around their lending, that type of thing, to ensure that they have the strongest offer possible. Once an offer is accepted, you have a due diligence period. So you're going to do all of your inspections. You'll have the lender send out an appraiser. You'll start getting all your documents to the lender so that you can get into underwriting and approved for your loan. So let's start with the search process. Like I said, there's always going to be some trade-offs. So price, condition, and location. What I find a lot of times is, okay, people will say to me, well, $425 is the top end of my budget, and I want a townhouse, and I would like to buy in Arlington. And I say to them, well, that price point is probably more likely going to get you a townhouse in Centerville, or maybe Springfield, but we'll start discussing different locations that you can afford with that budget. What I find is people will usually choose between, do I want a bigger house and live a little further out? Or am I willing to move into a smaller house and be a little closer in based on my budget? So like I said, I feel like your search is always evolving a little bit, and it changes a little as you go. The MLS, like I said, is the database. In there, we do have coming soon listings. And if you work with the right team, there is the opportunity to find some off-market listings. We did recently have some pretty big rule changes with that, so it's not quite as prevalent as it used to be, but there are still ways to find things that are off market. So you'll want to talk to your realtor about that. Like I said, you can go to open houses or you can go and tour. The biggest thing I recommend is beware of working directly with the listing agent. If you call the listing agent, you have to recommend that they first and foremost represent the seller. So they will be honest with you, but they don't necessarily have your best interest in mind. All right, moving on to the due diligence period. So the three categories of decision-making are pricing, terms, and contingencies. When we find a house that you like, I'll send a comparable market analysis so we can determine a fair value for a home. And then we'll talk about what are the contingencies and terms we can include. So like I said, one of them is going to be how quickly can we close? But the biggest contingencies that are going to be a major part in making your offer stronger are your home inspection contingency. How quickly can you turn around a home inspection? Your appraisal. So the lender is going to send out a third party to assess the value of the home. And based upon the assessment, you may have the opportunity to renegotiate on the list price. But from the seller's point of view, the faster that you can have the appraisal done, the stronger the offer. And then the final one is your finance contingency. Like I said, that's when you send in all your documents and you go into underwriting. And depending on how quickly the lender can get you through underwriting, the stronger your offer is, because in the seller's mind, the quicker you can get through your due diligence period, the more security they have in you making it to settlement. So that's why it's so important to work with a local lender, because generally they can do things quicker because they have an underwriting team in their office. So yeah, I talked about those. And then the last one is, like Rhoda said, if you buy a condo or a house that's part of a homeowners association, then you are required to receive the governing documents. That's going to include the rules and regulations, the budget, and all the important information that you need to know. So when you receive those, you have a 72-hour window to review them, and it's really important that you look through them. So after an offer is taken, you usually do a 30-45 day close. It's pretty competitive here, so I do see faster than that pretty often. And once you go in for settlement, that's when you get to receive the keys and move in. Most of the time, there are a couple of other scenarios that you'd want to discuss with your agent. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Scott. He's going to talk through some of the most important pieces of your home inspection, which you'll have done right after an offer is accepted.
One second, let me try to pull it up. You guys got it yet?
Yep, I see it now.
All right. Well, thank you, Alli. Again, like she said, my name's Scott Beckman. I'm with BPG Inspections. She asked me to come up with about the top 5 red flags that you're going to find on an inspection. There's also plenty of other things that you're going to find, but try to narrow it down to the top 5, being either safety or cost. Home inspections is a small piece of the home buying process, but it's a rather important one. Our job is to kind of present you with as much information as we can, and then allow your agent, Alli, to kind of negotiate and figure out how you want to go about either asking for credits or repairs. So we'll start with our first one. First one being a aged or damaged roof. Replacing a roof can be a very expensive investment, especially after purchasing your first home. Not only does it cost something to consider, but also having a faulty roof can allow water intrusion from above, damaging other components of the house. Some things to look for is shingles that curl up at the corners, missing shingles, cracked shingles, or excessive loss of granules. It's all something that on inspection, we try to get up on the roof. We try to get the best view as we can, take plenty of pictures. With this, we try to give you an age on it as well, just to kind of let you know if it's something you're going to have to replace in the next 5 years, 10 years, or you have 20 or 30 years left. Another thing we try to pay attention to is an aging HVAC system. Average furnace lasts about 15 to 20 years, where AC unit maybe 10 to 15 years. Again, this is another large cost or large expense you could have to pay, especially after moving in. Sometimes these units cost on the upwards of $10,000 to $12,000. So what we'll do is we'll completely run all the systems, make sure they're working properly, heating and cooling like they should. Kind of give you a rough estimate on the age as well. We can check the serial numbers and like I say, give you an estimate on how long it might last. And if it's something that could go in the next few years, that's something that we're going to tell you to budget for, possibly replace. Also, the older units, they're going to be a little less efficient and they're going to cost a little bit more money to heat and cool. You have the cost issue, but also summertime, it's not as bad. But if your unit goes up, you're going to be out of AC, but it's a little more serious in the wintertime if it's 20, 30 degrees outside and you don't have any heat. So that's something that we'll definitely try to point out and make sure it's working properly. Another one is outdated wiring. Depending on how old your house is, the newer wiring probably within the last 20, 30 years is pretty good. Older homes, typically before 1940s, they may have older outdated wiring known as knob and tube. So this is type of wiring is not up to code and could be a fire hazard. So one of the first two issues, they were more of a price thing and further damaging the home. The outdated wiring can be more of a safety factor. We don't want any fires in your new house or such like that. You don't want to have the extra and added expense. Today's standards pertaining to GFCI and AFCIs or are breakers that we try to have in place to lessen the likelihood of shocks and arcs and fire causing issues. Also, so there's some electrical panels that are known to be more problematic. So that's something that we'd like to point out. Our job as inspectors, we're kind of a generalist. So we're going to point out certain things. Now, if there's a panel that's suspicious, we're going to recommend having a licensed electrician come out and evaluate. Sometimes these upgrades can be costly. So that's something that should be taken in consideration during the buying process. Again, our job is to point out information. So if there's a box that we seem to know that's problematic, that's something where Alli or your agent might be able to either negotiate a credit or have it replaced. Another one is water intrusion. I'm also a fireman, and I'm actually more afraid of water than I am anything else. And when you have a house, that's kind of a big issue. The water can come from anywhere, from the foundation, faulty downspouts and gutters. A lot of times the rainwater that comes from the sky going down the roof, improper grading causes the water to flow back towards the house. We recommend having extensions just to get that water away. Also, the ineffective roof system or older roof system and faulty plumbing can allow water to leak and go where it's not supposed to from within the house. These situations can allow water into the house, damaging buildings, materials, and also growth of mold and other organic growth. With asthma, respiratory issues, a lot of times this mold or different things can be very costly to remediate and get rid of, as well as health issues. Signs to look at to cover up for water intrusion is freshly painted surfaces, dehumidifiers, and strong air fresheners. I know it's a little difficult nowadays because we have masks on all the times because of COVID. A lot of times it's kind of, you go in and it's nice that they repainted the house, but if they just repainted the basement or just the ceiling underneath the bathroom, those are kind of things that we look for. Also, you'll see dehumidifiers, and sometimes they take the dampness out of the air, but if they have 3 or 4 of them running and, you know, they're full and the 2-3 hours we're at the inspection, they have to empty one out. There might be some other issues going on. What we like to do is we go around and do an infrared scan. We also check with a moisture meter just to kind of cover ourselves and look out for the fire. Also, strong air fresheners, kind of to mask the smell. Now, this is a seminar, and we're donating to a pet rescue. But you can also tell if they have dogs and cats in the house. So if the air fresheners are covering up that smell, it's not as bad. But if it's a moldy, musty smell, then that's something that we have a little concern about. Our last big red flag is foundation cracks. They can be anywhere from minor to catastrophic. Usually when you think foundation cracks, you think, you know, it's bad, it's terrible. In the home inspection, there's anything can be good, anything can be bad. You could have a roof issue that costs a couple $100 to fix, or you could have a roof issue that costs $15,000. So everything can be fixed. It's just the amount of zeros that's behind it. So with cracks in the foundation, typical settlement shrinkage cracks, they can be sealed, and you want to monitor them for intrusion. If the cracks are more serious, anything over a ½ inch or there's differential, you're going to want to have it evaluated. Horizontal cracks are particularly dangerous. A lot of times you'll have pressure from the outside, bad grading, water from the downspouts and gutter, adding to that soil outside the house that pushes in on the walls, causing them to crack. This can be excessive pressure on the outside wall, which it can lead to major breakdown and collapse. Something like that to repair, they're going to have to come out and dig out probably 8 to 10 feet below the foundation, and then secure it, shore it up, and then backfill it back into there. Again, that's going to be more on your, you know, tens of thousands of dollars instead of a couple $100 to fix a and again, these repairs can be more expensive due to being structural. Try not to scare people when we do these inspections, but we also try to notify them and let them know what's going on. Sometimes our reports might have 20 or 30 things, but we try to prioritize and let you know, hey, these are the things that you probably should ask for. These are some things you should get taken care of sooner than later. And then this goes on your to-do list. Cosmetic stuff, painting, some small trim stuff on the interior. As long as there's no serious structural issues, we kind of give you somewhat of a clean bill of health. So with that, again, the inspection process is a small piece, but it's a very important one. So we try to find out everything we can and get into every little crack and crevice we can, check all the doors, windows, outlets, and just kind of familiarize you with your new house. And with that, I'm going to return it back to Alli.
Perfect, thanks. All right, so we're going to go ahead and cover some of the home selling process now. And let me try this one more time. I don't know why it's not working. Okay, perfect. I think I got it. So let's dive into some, and I'm going to do, this is of course just kind of an overview. So it's not going to go into great detail, but for the home selling process, I highly recommend to people you want to get with an agent who is willing to work with you heavily during the home prep process. So what our team likes to do is we will meet with the client and we'll do a tour of their entire house. And what we'll do is we'll make a very strategic list of what needs to be done so that the house is market ready. So once we make that list, we'll usually give them some time to execute those projects. It just makes such a big difference to buyers when they go into the home as to what it looks like. And some little things like paint and cleaning and stretching carpet, little things usually go a long way. Another thing we usually recommend to people is staging. I know that scares some people off because there is some cost to it, but I can tell you that it usually helps you get more offers than one. I've walked into countless homes with buyers, and the ones that are staged always have more interest. It seems that buyers just have a hard time visualizing. So if they have something in there that looks really pretty, it sells them on the house. And then the final things, you know, we're going to install a for sale sign if it's a detached home or a townhouse, and then we'll bring in a professional photographer to take pictures and get it ready to go. So once it's on the multiple listing service, the MLS, our database, that's when the seller is going to start receiving notifications and requests for tours. You're hopeful in the first week that you get, some good traction, get a good start out the gate. And the listing agent should offer to host an open house. I know that COVID's going on, so even if, they don't want to have an in-person open house, they should do a virtual one. If they're getting a lot of traction, we'll usually set an offer deadline to try to drum up interest. And that usually leads to buyers submitting their best and final offer the first time they submit. So once the seller chooses an offer, that's when we can do a little bit of negotiation. So negotiation on price, the terms we talked about, how quickly can we close? How big is their earnest money deposit? And you can also do a little bit of negotiating on the contingencies. Can they get someone in, and they're faster for the home inspection. There's different types of home inspections that can be in an offer. There's the right to void only and the right to negotiate and void. So can we negotiate with them so that they only have the right to void and they don't have the right to ask for repairs? Once you have a ratified offer, that's when all parties have signed off. That's when the buyer will go into their due diligence period. You may have to do some, repairs at that time, depending on how everything goes. And there's a few things to address. If an appraisal comes in low or the buyer is not approved for their financing, then we will have some hoops to jump through. But this is usually, a calmer part of the process in comparison to getting your home ready for the market. And I like to talk about buying and selling simultaneously because a lot of people, go back and forth about, well, how should I do it? So there are some options. The first one is a post-settlement occupancy agreement. It's also known as a rent back. So what happens is the seller they sell their home to the buyer, they go to the closing table, and then the seller actually stays in the home and pays a certain amount per day. It's usually the carrying cost. So that could include your taxes, your insurance, your principal and interest. And if there's an association fee, then you would be charged per day based on what, the rate that is decided in the contract. You can do a rent back for up to 60 days, and that gives you, after settlement, a couple of months to find a new home. You can do a home of choice contingency. And what that means is when you accept the offer, you add an addendum saying that the deal will, or the transaction will only go through if you're able to find a house that you like. Now, I find with this one, it's a lot shorter on the timeline. So you accept the offer, but then you only have a couple of weeks to find a new house. So it doesn't give you a ton of flexibility in terms of finding the perfect home, but it is an option. On the buyer side, what you could do if you're a seller who's selling and buying, you could go and before you've accepted an offer on your home, you can place an offer on a new home that you like and make it contingent on your current house selling. This gives you a little bit more flexibility to purchase first. So you buy a house or you find a house you like, you put in an offer and you say, okay, this offer is contingent on my house selling. Now, the only thing to remember is this market is so competitive that a lot of times you don't have the flexibility to negotiate for that. So one of the best options I've found and what I usually recommend to people if they really want to buy before they sell is to look into getting a home equity line of credit. Essentially, you're taking out a mortgage on your home, but you'll have enough money for the down payment. And when you do find a new home and when your house sells, you'll pay off the home equity line of credit. So you'll want to talk to a lender to get more specifics on that. The one thing I will tell you is if you want to go with this option, you need to set it up well in advance because the lender will have to send out an appraiser to assess the value of the home. And then based on what the appraiser comes back with, that's how much money you will get for your home equity line of credit. So with that, I am going to pass it over to Helen, who can talk about settlement.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Helen Krause. I'm with New World Title. I am going to pull up my PowerPoint slide now as well. Of course, let's see. Where did it go? I'm not sure. It's like open on my computer and it's not showing up as an option. So great. All right. Sorry, guys.
I actually did the same thing.
I know, I had to scroll down. I didn't see it. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so we handle the settlement portion, and I know a lot of people don't understand exactly what we do. A lot of times people think that we work for the lender, or just don't really know. The only time that we actually see the customer is at the closing table for the most part. So there's a lot of things that go behind the scenes as well. So let's actually put this up as a slideshow. Okay, here we go. So what do we do? What's the title company do? Well, it's very behind the scenes, as I mentioned. We're researching the title. Basically, we want to make sure we can issue title insurance for the purchaser. So we have to clean up any potential issues that we see. And what I mean by that is, say the seller has 2 mortgages, we need to make sure that both of those are paid off. Sometimes we see a mortgage out there that's an old mortgage that should have been paid off and wasn't, and we have to clean that up. We have to make sure they have paid all their monies to the condo association or their taxes, and they don't have like a huge balance they need to pay to get them caught up. Or if they do, we want to make sure that's handled, and we don't want the buyer to inherit that. So it's a lot of research behind the scenes of anything we can find that the seller could have owed money for, that we want to have cleared up for the buyer, essentially. We also coordinate with all the parties. So we're in touch with the buyer, the seller, the agents on both sides, the loan officer for the buyer, the payoff lenders for the seller, the county. So all these different parties, HOA, everybody that's owed money or that is a party to the transaction, we're communicating with all of them to coordinate. And then we actually, of course, schedule with you guys to come in and sign the paperwork, and we handle all the paperwork with you. And then after closing, we have to go to the courthouses and record those documentation of the mortgage and the deed transferring the property. And then we disperse all the funds. So all the monies also come into us, and then we send it out once we can after closing. So it's a lot that we do, but it's kind of hidden behind everybody else. So basically what a settlement is the event where the property is transferred from the seller to the buyer, and a title company is an unbiased party that facilitates it to make sure the process is done properly and the contract is followed. So the title company really can't represent the buyer or the seller. We are neutral and just trying to make sure things are done properly. What actually happens at the settlement is the funds come in and then are dispersed, like I mentioned, after the sale is recorded in Virginia. Paperwork is signed. The 2 main things are the deed from the seller to transfer the property to the buyer. That's the biggest one for the seller to sign. And then the buyer side, they need to perform by bringing their money, as well as signing all the documents. And then keys can be given and we can celebrate. So it's an exciting time. It's a little overwhelming and daunting with the paperwork, but it is exciting. I do enjoy, getting to be there with everybody for that point. And typically realtors are there. Sometimes loan officers, not as often. With COVID, sometimes we don't see everybody at the table, but it's really a great time to celebrate. I actually love people taking their mask pictures now at the settlement table because it's a monumental time. You bought a house during a pandemic, so it's very interesting, but it's very exciting and great time to actually move. Everybody has lots of time at home to pack and make their house look beautiful. So I find a lot of clients are enjoying, this time to move and buy a house. And what do I need to bring? You'll bring a photo ID. Sometimes some lenders require 2. So have, a passport or a driver's license, as well as maybe a health insurance card, something like that. Either a cashier's check or a wire. A lot of times we're preferring wires these days, but make sure the wire is for basically the down payment and then the closing costs, however that's all worked out. And your loan officer will give you that number. We work with the loan officer to get that final number a day or so before closing. I wish it was further, but typically it's a couple days, maybe before closing. And then you'll wire that over. I will just say one note about wire fraud. It is real. So make sure that you contact the title company independently and call them and just confirm the wire instructions, because there are times where you get an email that looks like it's coming from your lender or your realtor that is not accurate. So that is something that's really important to keep in mind, just double checking wiring instructions as well. A couple questions I get often, One is about title insurance. Title insurance basically protects you from anything that we can't see in the title search. So if there's fraud or something was recorded in the wrong place, something that we're not able to tell, or if there's errors, unfortunately, title insurance covers you for those types of things. And it is really important. It's a one-time fee versus like homeowners insurance or mortgage insurance that you pay over and over. So that's very important. And there's a couple different kinds. So there's the lender's title insurance, which is required if you have a loan. And then there's two types of owner's policies, which I can go into more detail with you at a later time. How do I choose which company? Kind of like what Rhoda was saying earlier and Alli talking about realtors. I think just going with either who your realtor or lender recommend, I think that is very helpful because they've worked with quite a few and know who are the best. Someone who's local to your area and that does a decent amount of business there. You could always ask questions about how quickly they get their title searches back, because we do find issues actually quite often. However, we get the title searches back very quickly. And so time is really important, and time can usually heal and cure most of those issues. But some title companies don't get that until like a week before closing, and then there's not a lot of time to fix issues. So that's a good question to ask. And, just working with someone local that you can trust is good. How should I hold title? That will depend on how many people are on the title. It's very easy if it's just one person, but if there's multiple people, there are different ways to hold title, and it depends on if you're married or not married and things like that. So there's some good options there that you want to discuss with your title company. And then I think lastly is, should I get a survey? And I find a lot of clients turn this down, and I think it's really important. And what I mean by survey is a house location survey. That is what shows your property lines. If there's an easement, which means maybe the county could access your property, things like that. If there's maybe the seller built something into their neighbor's lot, like that would be something good to know before you buy the house, because that could become an issue. So they're typically not very expensive in the Northern Virginia area, like a normal modest lot. Usually they're about $350, a little bit more if you want the corners marked, but they can get expensive if you're buying acreage and things like that. But I find that it's really important, and a lot of times clients are happy to get them and see what they're really buying as far as the lot goes. And that is it for me. So thank you very much. I'll stop my sharing here.
Perfect. Okay, so getting into some of the last sections, and hopefully it works this time. Perfect. All right. So we're going to dive into COVID-19 impacts. We've talked a little bit about a lot of this, but I want to show you here. This is actually a chart of the average weekly showings that we've seen 2019 versus 2020. 2020 is the orange line. 2019 is the dark blue, purplish line. As you can see, and this is where I'm saying this year is totally different than most. Showings went way down in April and May, in the mid-March. Surprisingly enough, that's usually when we see the most activity on the market. That's when we saw a lot more negotiating room for buyers. As you can see though, showings have pretty much picked back up, and they're about where they were last year, and it's stayed that way. And I think a large portion of that's driving that is just that there's awesome interest rates right now. But it just goes to show, in terms of showings and how many buyers out, we really have recovered since our big downfall in March and April, in terms of COVID really taking the stage and hitting us hard. And then we'll cover some new business practices, common showing practices. So I will say it has normalized a little bit since March, but given the growing number of COVID cases, I do wonder if we're going to start heading kind of back to where we were. So what I did see at that time, there's, an increased use of video tours, 3D tours, and floor plans. What I have found with buyers is I'm doing less showings, but I find that I have the same amount of business. And I think it's because buyers are taking very seriously doing their due diligence and research before actually going out and seeing a home. So before going and touring, I always recommend, if there's a video tour or a 3D floor plan or a 3D tour, to look at that, to make sure that there's nothing that's going to eliminate it without even having to go out to the house. I've done quite a few FaceTime and Zoom tours, so that is an option if a buyer's uncomfortable with going to the house. We also saw a lot of virtual open houses in March, April, and May. Like I said, during the entire time we did have regular showings, so I would put on gloves, mask up, and stay far away from my clients and I just open the door from them. But so that being said, we have virtual options now. You can go to a virtual open house. You can do a virtual showing. If you want to do it the more traditional route, we also have the opportunity to take you by the house, so long as you're following proper COVID protocol. That one of the biggest changes I've seen with in-person showings is that each person needs to have a mask. They need to have gloves, bring hand sanitizer in your cars, expect to have to take off your shoes or put on booties. The other biggest thing is usually they're only letting 2 people go into a house with their agent. So if you want to bring a bunch of kids or, your mom and dad, they probably won't allow it during this time. And even with home inspections, I've seen some limit to how many people that can be there. Really does depend on the inspector. But again, just expect that if you go to a home inspection, they might not let your aunt or your uncle or, a bunch of extra people come. And then Helen kind of touched on this, but for closings in particular, we're seeing a lot more digital signatures. It's usually 100% available to the seller side, not so much on the buyer side because the bank still needs the wet signature. So most of the time the buyer still has to go in. And like Helen said, a lot of different title companies are going to limit the attendees. So it's just something you should ask about before. Settlement is who they allow in. Some of them are just allowing the signers. Some of them will allow agents. Some of them will allow, a few extra people if you wanted. You just need to call and ask what the individual protocol is. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone for attending. Again, I really want to thank the speakers and the sponsors of this event. And Friends of Fairfax County Animal Shelter is really thankful as well. So I just really appreciate everyone's support. And with that said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if anybody has questions, please feel free to ask. And this video will be posted. So if anybody has questions, they can go and get our contact information from here and email us individually.
Thanks, Alli. Are there any questions from the people in the audience? If you have a question, you can submit it via chat or you can raise your hand and I can call on you to ask the question. All righty. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and thanks very much for participating. Alli, can you hold tight and then we can let everybody else go?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you.